Welcome, everybody. Today, we have an incredible show planned for you. I have a special guest, Gareth Soloway, on the show. And much like our channel, in the very beginning of this year, we saw some issues in the charts. And we said back in January, it's more than likely that there's going to be a large crash. And I know Gareth was right around that time frame saying pretty much the same thing. And we both held true this whole way. And here we are at an interesting point in the market. And I think I have one perspective and Gareth has another. And it's highly important as a trader to understand different perspectives. Don't only go with what your emotion is telling you. Only go with your gut and your strategy. And that's why we have Gareth on the show today, back again. And everybody loves his opinion. So he's going to give his latest and greatest opinions on the chart. And then at the end, we might have some dialogue of what do you think about this scenario? What do you believe about this? And I think it's going to be a hell of a show. So Gareth, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me back, Steve. It's so wonderful. And I love that you pointing out, again, you guys were on point when the top was in on Bitcoin and the collapse was coming. I was. And I'd like to just point out that I think the commonality is that you or I, we don't focus on emotion. We don't focus on hype. We focus on the charts, right? And I think the charts are the one truth that a trader or an investor can focus on where it doesn't sway you based on hype. And that's why they tend to tell you the correct outcome of where things are going.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to see your perspective. And I would love for my audience to really dig into what you have to say. So I think we start with, what's your take on this short-term move of Bitcoin? What are you expecting here in the short term? What are you looking at? What are the key charts you're honed in on at this moment?
Yeah, so for sure, number one, looking at the Bitcoin chart, to me, this is where a technical bounce should have occurred. A lot of people were surprised when Bitcoin went below the 19.5-ish 2017 high. But if you understand how markets work, they tend to just go a little bit beyond key levels because there's a lot of stops put there. They need to run those stops. They have to get the maximum people bearish before the bounce can occur. So we saw, for instance, some bankruptcies, Celsius, Voyager, and some other situations as well that were really adding to that bearish sentiment. And that kind of led right into this bounce in the near term. And I still think the market has more upside in Bitcoin. So for me, the first target I have on the upside in the near term is that this pivot low, which was the Terra Luna low, that's probably a near-term resistance level, right? We got close. We got within about little over $1,000 away from that. But I still think that will get hit after such a dramatic move up in Bitcoin, where you went almost straight from 19,000 to 24. It makes a lot of technical sense why price needs to pause, have a little bit of a pullback. We heard from Elon Musk yesterday with Tesla that Tesla sold 75% of its Bitcoin. Again, I don't think that was anything other than Elon Musk trying to just pare back some risk. But a lot of people, that'll be used as a reason to sell their Bitcoin as well, since he has so many followers. So again, very just normal kind of pullback here. I do think there's another move up. If we take out this 25.5-ish area, then I think your next stop is all the lows from this area. This is going to be an epically big resistance level, right? So I can put a trend line right through there. And what you can also see here is that one of the things in technical analysis, and I know you know this, Steve, is that when you have a confluence of trend lines kind of converging, that's going to be a bigger resistance level in this case than one trend line. And so what you can see here is if you connect the high from 2021, November, and the high here, that trend line is getting very close to this area here. So my thought process is that I'm pretty certain, I would say 70-80% sure that we'll see the 25.5. I think there's probably a 60 to 70% chance we'll get up to 28 and change here. But this is kind of my zone of where I think Bitcoin stalls out before the next leg lower. And again, I know people don't want to hear that. I don't blame them, but I do still think there is one more leg lower to flush out a lot of people that think the lows are in here. And again, the thinking isn't just pure. It's not just pure, me guessing at it. The thought process here, for me at least, is that the measured move has not been completed, right? So if we take this high to this low, and then you see how the beautiful kind of channel, we had this beautiful parallel channel created. And then if you take that distance and you replicate it here from this high, it actually takes us down to about 12 to 13,000. 12 to 13,000 also happens to be this pivot over here, right in this zone, as well as this area right down here as well. So right kind of in this groove. So that's kind of part of the reasoning. I also think that I worry that we haven't seen enough hardship in the crypto sector. So one of the things that I pay attention to is, seeing Voyager, seeing Celsius. I mean, those are things that naturally have to occur. But I still think that you haven't seen enough of it. It bothers me that Michael Saylor, there hasn't been, it got down to 21,000. He then said, oh, my level's much, much lower. The markets almost tend to kind of squeeze those people. And it doesn't seem like MicroStrategy has been squeezed yet, or some of these other players out as well. And I still think there's far too many cryptocurrencies for a healthy market. So I'm a huge long-term bull on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I think it's the wave of the future, just like the internet was. But we haven't fully seen the internet collapse that we saw in 2000 replicated in crypto just yet. So again, those are some of the little key pivot points that I'm looking at. So for me, I'm looking at more of a 12, 13,000 ultimate bottom on Bitcoin. I also think that if you compare Bitcoin and say, okay, Bitcoin is the Amazon.com of its era, right? So, monster company now, but in 2000, it was a smallish company, not the size of Bitcoin, obviously, but it was kind of that leader. And we saw Amazon collapse actually 95% from its highs in the .com collapse, and Bitcoin hasn't even done 80% to 85, which is its normal cycle correction. So for me, I look at that, and then just to throw in one more thing, and then I'll throw the mic back to you, is that we've seen a lot of this kind of bloodletting going on, but I don't think we've seen all out panic. And again, if anything, this crypto correction should be more substantial than past ones, because the Fed is not printing money anymore. And this is the first time in Bitcoin's lifespan where the Fed has not been printing a ton of money. So that would lead me to be more cautious, thinking that we could see some further downside after a bounce here. Just the fact that the Fed is being more aggressive to fight inflation. So anyways, I love the fact that we have slightly differing opinions. I think that's very helpful to everyone, and I'll throw it back to you on that note.
So I actually agree with a lot of what you said in terms of, hey, have we had that, the .com bubble washout? No, not even close. Have we had a washout that we should, with a bunch of these crap coins absolutely going away? No, we haven't. Have we had a typical washout compared to what we've had before? We haven't. Have we had like real panic and a lot of people saying Bitcoin is dead? We haven't. We haven't had that whole bucket of stuff yet. Completely agree with that. I think where I want to jump into, and then we'll talk about a couple points as we go on. If you're in the shoes of a relatively new trader and you lost money on this way down, you sold at a bad time, and you're looking to get back in, do you recommend to get back in and ride it up to a potential 25, 28? Do you recommend that person wait for potential further downside? If they're trying to play like the medium long-term game, what would be your advice to them in this situation in the market?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I want to be clear on that is like, so for me, when we got down, so I've always said since we were at 69, 68,000 is that there would be a time where I start accumulating a hodl position, right? And so what I did was, and this goes to your point too, is like, I don't know where the low is going to be. Maybe it is the low. It's very, very possible that the low is already in. And so what I did was, when we got to 19,000, I started what I would consider to be a 1/6 position of what I want to accumulate of my hodl position. So again, if you think about it, let's say $120,000 is what I want to hodl on Bitcoin. I put in 20,000 at 19,000, and I'm just going to leave that there, because if this is the bottom and we go to 100 to 500, I do want to have exposure. And I think we're low enough when we got below 20 where it's smart to, even if it goes to 12, if you're in at like 19, 18, 20, it's not that big of a deal versus if you're in at 65,000. I mean, then it's like major pain, especially if you're in that dollar cost averaging mode, like what I'm looking to do. So I think that's important. And I would say that that's kind of the attitude I would tell people that are kind of mid to long term to have, is that in the scheme of things, you're going to look back on this and say, oh, what did it matter if I bought at 20 or 18 or 16 or even 12? At this stage, when it's 500,000, you're just like, this is awesome. So I think that's the important thing to kind of take away from it. And I'd also like to just point out is, like, if you go to this Amazon chart here, and let me get rid of some of these short-term lines because I want to show you guys that longer-term chart. But if we go to let's go to the monthly chart. So if we go to the monthly chart and you just look at where Amazon was in the .com era, right? So this is the M top that Bitcoin kind of has. So even if Bitcoin does correct down 80, 85, 90%, look at where Amazon went afterwards, right? So here it is down here, .coms down at 13 cents. This is obviously post-split. And then look at where it goes to. It goes to like $190. I mean, think about the X times of this. And then again, did it matter when Amazon was at 13 cents? What if you bought it at 20 cents? What if you bought it at 25 cents? Doesn't at this stage, it doesn't matter. So I think that's the mid to long-term outlook, is you have to say, listen, timing bottoms is unbelievably hard. I'm going to space my buys out and at least get some skin in the game.
So a couple ways I want to go with this. First is you talked about that 1/6, which I think this is so important for people to hear, because they're like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't I just take all my cash and just throw it in? So yeah. I think my first question is, when are the other 6 made into the market? At what point? Is there a certain strategy? And are you thinking about taking profits with any of that 1/6 at this 25 to 28 level?
So good question. And again, the 1/6 basically comes from 20 years of trading experience, where in my first 5 years as attempting to become a profitable trader, I found that, when I would go all in and say, oh, I'm going to be right on this level, the market always made me look the fool. And so I adjusted that. I kind of looked at my trading journal and my kind of thought process and how my results were coming out. And I saw that, wait a minute, when I would buy all in here of my full position, 70 to 80% of the time it would go below that. And sometimes a lot below that, where I would be in a lot of pain before it kind of played out, right? So the idea is that I learned from those, and I said to myself, listen, if I just buy a percentage of what I want to own, and then I space out my buys methodically, I'll do much, much better. And I have. My win rate has soared because of that kind of thought process. So what I'm doing with Bitcoin is, at 19,000 basically between 2,000 and 3,000, every 2,000 to 3,000 down, I'll add another 1/6 position that gives me basically the ability to accumulate all the way down sub $10,000. So again, that's kind of the thought process there. And it just helps me keep emotion at a minimum. And emotion is the worst thing as a trader can have. You have to be robotic. You have to just say, okay, these are the facts. So when you tend to go in a full position, you're like on the edge of your seat right away, versus when you're in a 1/6, it's like, okay, if it goes down 3,000, no big deal. I almost want it to go down 3,000 because I want to continue to accumulate. And if it doesn't and it goes to 100,000, I'm still making great money anyways. And it's that mentality of being defensive as a trader that I think made the big difference in my trading career versus being offensive. Offensive, you go in at a level, you're saying, oh, I'm going to be right all the time, and the market makes you pay. Versus defensive, you're always kind of playing the safe game, which ends up making you so much more money over the longer term.
I think you nailed it. And one of the things you said is so important for people to hear. It's that bottom, right? The bottom, it's sexy. As a trader, is it super important? No, it's not. Especially if you're in a long position. Years from now, it'll be laughable to talk about, oh, I was really contemplating that 17,000 buy area or the 14. There's no difference at all, and it's laughable. And the amount of stress that a trader spends on that decision, it's laughable in the big picture, but you don't realize it until you just make mistake after mistake after mistake, which Gareth and I unfortunately got destroyed as beginner traders. And it's funny you mentioned, Gareth, because you mentioned that when there was these market busts, you got in a little bit early and then you got destroyed because the market went down even further and you're like, oh my God. And I more followed the herd. I waited for that hypothetical number that was really supposed to come, and I was supposed to be this genius, and it just never came. And I bought too late back on the way up, and it drove me nuts with the amount of stress. So I think both of us take that into our chart analysis today, which I think is very fascinating. But
It is.
what I want to ask you, Gareth, is for me to go against the herd is usually the fair bet with Bitcoin. And I think when Bitcoin was near its top, right, everybody was incredibly bullish. Picture this: 1 year ago today, everybody's calling for Bitcoin 100K, right? Did that happen? No. The high majority said it was going to happen. It was an absolute definite, and it didn't happen. And I think what's really interesting, not talking about the charts, but just talking about data, when we hit that 17.5, right? Every poll that you saw on the internet said we're going a lot lower. The high majority. And even we did a poll 1 week after, 2 weeks after, and you look across the internet, everyone's saying we're going a lot lower. So that's making me think, wow, okay, let me look closer at this. And then when I started looking at the charts, the way we analyze it, it said, hey, there's a strong possibility the bottom could be in. So what would you say to that, just going against the herd? Does that make you nervous that the majority think we're going a lot lower?
Yeah, so you're 100% right. Is going against the herd is almost always the correct decision when you get to those extremes. And we certainly saw those extremes when we were below 19.5 and below that 2017 high. So I think in the very least that's exactly what I was looking at when I went long Bitcoin as a swing trade as well as the hodl position to get a little bit of exposure there. But the question I would have is like, okay, so as we bounce up, so as soon as we've now bounced up to 22, 23, I think yesterday we hit 24, how quickly does the herd become too bullish again? And that would be one of the things that I would watch, and I'm sure it's something you're watching, is to see, okay, does everyone then all of a sudden really quickly jump on the bandwagon? For it to be a true bottom, you want to see people be really, really nervous. Even when it bounces, back to X amount, people are still like, I don't know if I trust it. I'm still bearish. And so that's one of the things I'm really focused on here is how quickly are people saying, okay, the bottom is in versus still being skeptical. And I think yesterday when we were at 24, we started to see some of that, but now that it's pulled back, it's kind of lessened a little bit. But it's certainly, again, gauging that emotion of the crowd, of the masses is the most important thing a trader can do aside from learning the technicals of the chart.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the most difficult thing for humans to do. If you're walking down the path and everyone says that right side, that right path is the way to go, you cannot go anywhere else. That is the direction. You have to go this way. This is the shortcut. Who's going on the left path when you have everybody telling you? So it's so difficult. And humans have a very difficult time with money because of greed, unfortunately.
Yes.
So that's the number one thing that gets in the way of trader success. Emotion is a money killer.
Just to say one thing too is I think that, like you're saying, is it's normal to have those emotions, but the best thing to do is to always go back to the chart and just look at something. So like, you go back to the 2021 high over here in November. And one of the things I stress, and I know you guys stress it too, is you don't want to be one of those chasers, right? And so when you had you're basically piercing double top, and I understand the breakout mentality, but at the same time, you also have to look at where it came from, and you have to say that, okay, listen, like literally in 3 weeks, Bitcoin went from 40,000 to 65, 66,000. Do you really want to pay up that amount? And then also kind of juxtapose that with the emotion and say, wait a minute, everyone's too bullish, pull yourself back and say, wait a minute, this looks extended to me. How much higher can it go before it just naturally has a pullback? And then maybe at that point, that's a buying opportunity and reevaluate it there. But I think the charts are just so honest in terms of looking at it. And I always use this analogy of saying, if I go to the mall 1 week and I'm like, oh, I need a new pair of jeans, and 1 week that those jeans are $100, and then I go back the next week and I'm like, those same jeans are $200, I don't say to myself, oh my gosh, now I really have to buy it and maybe buy like 5 pair at 200. I say, wait a minute, maybe next week they'll go on sale again and I'll buy it at 100 again, right? And yet for some reason, investors are like, wait, the higher it goes, the more I want to get in. And you have to recognize that. You have to use the same kind of thought process when you go to the mall or you go to the supermarket where you're looking for sales, right? Discounts. That's the same mentality to apply to stocks and crypto and all those things.
I love that point. Treat crypto like a pair of jeans.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. It's very difficult to do. We do it easily with jeans.
Yep.
Everyone, even the herd.
Yeah.
But we can't do it with crypto. We can't do it with stocks. So that's very interesting. So if this is the bottom, what would you say to folks? Because unfortunately, as you know, Gareth, most bottoms in any market, the high majority of people miss it. They sit on their hands and they're just waiting for something to happen, and it doesn't happen. They get overwhelmed. They don't know when to enter. What would you say to them? What would be your advice, short term and long term?
I think when it comes to entering, people get this kind of like paralysis by analysis where a lot of times it's like, oh my goodness, it's getting scary, it's dropping, I don't know, maybe it's going to go lower. I'm starting to see more and more people kind of, going against, like you said, 10,000 target, 12,000 target. And I think the key for me, both short and long term, is saying, okay, before I even put anything in my limit orders for a buy or anything, let me first come up with my game plan, right? So let me think about, well, what is my thesis for getting in this trade here? Why am I liking it? Is it because it's fallen dramatically and we're into the 2017 highs? That's a valid technical factor, double or pivot high from 2017. And then also, once you have a firm thesis, and it should be something where, like, envision that you have to go before the board, right? The board of a thesis, topic for a college or university, and you have to defend that thesis. If someone says, well, why did you pick that level? You can't be like, well, Twitter said it was a good level, right? So you have to have like, well, 2017 high, I saw the RSI was doing this. I had to, there should be like 3 things that make a firm case for doing it. Once you have that, then you start saying, okay, well, even with those, fear is the biggest emotion that we have, fear and greed. I understand that price can go a little bit below my level. So let me decide what's my total investment in dollars before I even do a trade, before I enter anything. What am I going to put in this position totally? And then you say, okay, do I want to do just a quarter here to start it? Because then if you do a quarter, like we were talking about with the 1/6 position that I did, there's really no stress. And you're not going to get affected. Like when it breaks the 2017 highs, you don't want to be in a full position, get stressed, and then be like, oh my God, I got to get out because this could go to 12,000. That's too big of a loss to me. You have to be in that position to say, you know what? I'm only in a quarter position, or I'm only in a 6th position. No big deal. I'll just pick up a little bit more every 1,000 or 2,000 down to put myself in that position. And being stress-free in trading is so liberating. It makes you think so clearly. And so again, it's just about the thesis, knowing your total investment exposure that you're going to go to, and then understanding how much of a percent of that you'll start in at what levels.
Love that. What about the length of this bear market? What do you have in mind? What's your rough prediction? How long is this thing going to last? And then what do you look at to know that it's over? What do you look at to know that, hey, we're at the start of our next bull run?
Yeah. So in terms of knowing how long the bear market can last, I think the only thing we can do is look at past bear markets. At the same time, keep an asterisk near this one because it's different from the last ones, meaning the Fed is obviously tightening aggressively. Inflation is above 2%, much above. But since Bitcoin's been around, it's really been 2% or under inflation, at least reported. So you have these different things. But really, if you look at past cycles, it's been about 12 to 18 months that it takes for it to kind of bottom out. And then you kind of see what you really start to look for. And you can see here. So we had this initial drop, then a lot of chop. And by the way, for me, this is kind of where I think we are in Bitcoin. So this is 2017. My guess is we're kind of right in this area here, right? We just bottomed out. We're going to kind of do this. And then I think you might just get that one last dip, which will be the bottom level. This will kind of flush people out, that final flush that'll occur. But really what you can see here is you traded sideways for a long period of time before that last flush, and then it was a beautiful rounded bottom. And again, there's not going to be anything you're going to be able to find that's going to be like, aha, this is 100% a bottom. But it's more just, again, saying, okay, we have a rounded bottom, and then you start seeing, okay, once you start taking out some of these former levels, like to me, that would be something that I would watch, is this was a very, very keen level. Once we got above there, notice how Bitcoin really got some serious upside action. Now, again, did we come back and retest it later on? Absolutely. Right here, you retested it, but it quickly recovered again and got back above that level. But again, things like rounded bottoms, cup and handle patterns, little things like that, and taking out former support that are now resistance levels, those would be things that I would look for when it finally bottoms out, plus the emotional kind of capitulatory, free, panic, oh my goodness, is Bitcoin going to survive type mentality.
That's great. I think it's difficult for me. I don't think it's even technically possible for me to share my charts. I will touch on a few concepts just to get your idea, Gareth. So we use some different moving averages that have called the bottoms previously. We use those same ones in 2018 to call the bottom when everyone said we're crazy. And those ones are sounding now.
Interesting.
And that's where I'm coming from, is like, hey, these same charts that I used in 2018 are sounding. But then we've got that emotional part where you talked about earlier. Hey, we haven't had that flush out. Hey, there should be way more coins that are dying. Hey, there should be way more companies that are going bankrupt. This should be worse. We've got the Fed, we've got interest rate. This should be worse. But then the charts are saying, hey, Steve, these same ones you used in 2018 are sounding the same signal.
Yep.
So what would you say to that? And then one chart in particular, you mentioned the RSI earlier. The monthly RSI has reached a pretty critical level of just about 43, which it's the lowest in history. And the previous two bottoms were just at about 44 that marked the bottom. So I would love to get your insight on those topics.
Yeah, so I think you have to pay attention to the signals you're seeing. Is I think any trader pays attention to the technicals, right? So if you're getting those same signals, then in the very least it's giving you bullish signals. And I think knowing you'll monitor those signals, and if they start to shift, then you'll be on point and be able to react. But I think you're doing the right thing, which is following those signals. Like I said, I mean, me starting to inch in my hodl position, that's also something that you want to pay attention to as well, where I'm clearly saying that, yes, we haven't seen the flush out, but you also have to say, well, slowly Bitcoin is being adopted more and more. So maybe that's why we don't see that full flush out on crypto, is that, more and more people globally are opening, wallets and getting involved. I think that regulation is going to be something that's absolutely key and a very big positive. I saw Gary Gensler on CNBC today. He was talking about trying to protect investors and how crazy it is. And I think that's right. I mean, a year or two ago, people were like, oh, don't let the SEC get close to crypto. But I think after this, when people see that they may lose all their money that was in Celsius or Three Arrows Capital or all the, other things like that, I mean, there needs to be some sort of kind of safety measures put in where you can't have some shady stuff going in. And again, with those regulations, if we get those, that would actually, I think, be a very big positive, because there's a lot of big money, like pension funds and all these other things, that they won't go near crypto until there's a framework of safety, including older Americans. I think younger Americans and younger people globally are more into the risk taking. They've grown up with crypto more so. But I mean, there's trillions of dollars of retirees, and they're just not going to take that risk. And so if you can give them that framework where they say, okay, well, my money's, like FDIC insurance, it's guaranteed up to this amount. All right, now I feel a little bit safer in case there's fraud in one of these cryptocurrencies. So I think that, again, I think what you're seeing is absolutely valid, and it very well could be the case. I'm taking it from a little bit of the other perspective of like the .com era, where I still think there could be one, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. The bottoms, as you know, Gareth, they're sexy. Everybody wants to try to time the bottom with the perfect investment of their whole life. But the reality is we're so oversold. We're one of the most oversold points in Bitcoin's entire history. Like, close your eyes and buy some Bitcoin for the future, really. And don't try to time the bottom with the exact perfect number. I think, like you mentioned earlier, it's going to be laughable. But it makes for fun banter back and forth to say, hey, what's your opinion? Hey, what's your opinion? But I think that you nailed it. Take your positions now at these levels. If we go lower, take more positions. Nobody in the world knows where Bitcoin is going. We have our ideas for the charts. You have your ideas. But the reality is buy Bitcoin now for the future if you're long term. And I think what's important is to focus on the facts and the charts as you do. And it's going to be interesting. I want to do a follow-up in some time, and we'll see how the charts progress, because you, much like us, if facts in the charts change, we're going to change our whole stance. We just need facts in the charts.
I think that's the most important thing that, Steve, that is important to mention, is that a good trader is able to recognize when things shift. A lot of people out there are like, oh, you said this, but now you're saying this. And it's not that you're like a fair weather friend. It's that we literally every day get a new daily candle on the chart, and it's another piece to the puzzle. And yesterday it might have looked like a lion. Maybe today it looks like a jaguar, or something else. And the traders that don't adjust, they're the ones that lose all their money. And so you have to be able to adjust. So just like that, so just to show you here on my chart, I know I have lots of lines from when we were discussing earlier, but there is a point where I would actually join your crowd and say, okay, I think a low is in. So see this longer term trend line here. If we were to really establish ourselves above that and hold it, let's say for a week or two, and kind of consolidate, that's a longer term trend line where for me, I'd start to say, okay, now we've taken that out. Now we're holding it. We just didn't pierce it by a day or two, but we're actually staying above it. That would make me into more of that side of saying, okay, this might have been the low at that point. And the beauty of this is it's a downsloping trend line, so it's going lower and lower every day. So in 2 months, this will be at 28,000. In 4 months, at 26. So the longer we stay here, the lower that bogey level gets for being able to shift the perspective of saying, okay, now for me at least, we're in this new bull market potentially with a lot of upside near term versus another dip to the downside.
Love that. So everybody watching, draw that trend line. We're going to have Gareth on in the future. I think you brought up a good point, because adjusting that philosophy in the early stages back, 4 or 5 months ago, we started talking about that 13,700 just based on market structure. Just market structure. As this thing developed and things started to unravel, more facts came into the charts. And that's where it started to line up with our 2018 charts. And we were like, whoa, this was a surprise bottom. We were not expecting. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, who knows. But either way, we're going to have Gareth on the show again. Everybody loves Gareth. Make sure you go follow Gareth on Twitter, and also check out his crypto website, Verified Investing Crypto. He gives you trades there as well. Gareth, thank you for being on the show. And we look forward to having you on in the future.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me. It is always a pleasure to talk to someone who's technically minded and knows their stuff like you.
Appreciate it. There's only one question left: when to sell your cryptocurrency. Click right here, right now, to find the 3 simple steps.